Okay. So I'm going to give a kind of a brief recap of different sections of this Torah portion with a couple little highlights, and then I'm going to give a couple of anecdotal stories that relate to it. So this portion starts at 44 verse 18, and 44 verse 18 all the way to the end to chapter to the verse 34. Judah is giving a recap of kind of events that have taken place from his perspective, and then he, through his love towards Benjamin, he's exhibiting real repentance, contrary to the way that he behaved with Joseph chapters before. He is now willing to lay down his life for his brother, which reminds me of John 15:13, where Yeshua said, "There's no greater love than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." And Judah is very much doing that. And Judah is also kind of answering this question that was posed at the beginning of the scroll of Genesis. We have Cain, who asks, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And we have the answer to that question, where Judah's living that out, that he has finally come to determine that he is, in fact, his brother's keeper. And that is true for all of us, that we are called by our Messiah to lay down our lives for others and put other people's needs before our own. And Judah has learned that kind of the hard way, but he has learned that and shown us an example of that. In Genesis 45, 1 through 28, Joseph reveals himself. And then he has this one wonderful verse that really stands out. It says, verse 5, it says, "And now do not be grieved nor displeased with yourselves, because you sold me here, for Elohim sent me before you to preserve life." He knows that this was in some way beyond himself, that God is smarter than he is and more wise, and knew what he was doing when he sent Joseph there. And it's one of those verses that really sums up just a tremendous amount. From there, the brothers, they go back to their father, and they have to reveal to him that, hey, Joseph's actually still alive. And we'll go more into that a little bit later. The next section is Genesis 46, 1 through 27, where God speaks to Israel and reassures him and tells him that, I'm going to go with you. Don't be afraid. And then all of Israel does go. And Israel and all of his generations are named and listed. And then kind of the final section is chapter 46, 28 through 47, 27. And this is where Joseph and Israel reunite. And there's great weeping, and I presume joy. And then Pharaoh blesses Israel with the best of the land. And then, interestingly, Jacob blesses Pharaoh twice. And we'll talk more about that in the 1 o'clock study. And then Egypt, the people of Egypt, exchange their possessions so that they can live. So they give up all that they have so they can live. And Israel flourishes. And there's this, in different parts of the Bible, there's kind of like these little moments where it's like, oh, that's a happy ending. And a couple of that came to my mind this week, where Exodus 14, where they pass over the waters, they cross the Reed Sea, and then they see the Egyptians die. They see the wonders of God. They fear God, and they believe in him and his servant Moses. And then that chapter ends, and it's like, that's a wonderful, wonderful ending. And then another wonderful ending is 1 Kings chapter 8. The entire chapter is very long, and it's they've just built the temple. The presence of God comes down. Solomon's there, and he's kind of acting as this king priest, and he's offering sacrifices, and he prays to God, and then he blesses the people, and he calls them to do what God said and all this stuff. And then at the very end of the chapter, it says, "And the people blessed the king, and they went to their tents with joy." And it's like just one of those awesome little moments of a happy ending. Well, this Torah portion has one of those moments, this happy ending. It's verse 27. It says, "And Yisrael dwelt in the land of Mitzrayim, in the land of Goshen, and they had possessions there, and were fruitful and increased exceedingly." This is one of those wonderful little happy endings. And it says that they are in this land of Goshen. And Goshen, when the Bible writes that, it wants us to think of Eden. So Goshen is Gimel, Shin, Nun. And garden is gan. It is gimel nun. And so you just add a sheen in the middle. But this Goshen is a little Eden. It's not literally Eden or Garden of Eden, but very much figuratively, we're supposed to connect these dots. And Eden is this place, or Garden of Eden, is this place where heaven and earth meet, where God rules and reigns, and where there's flourishing. And we see Israel flourishing in this place. And they're fulfilling the call from back at the early part of Genesis, where God said, be fruitful and multiply. And they succeed in that, and they do so. So that's one of those little happy endings. If the story ended there, we would all be like sleeping well at night and just happy about it. But of course, things go on. So that is kind of the simple recap of this Torah portion. I do have an experience in life that reminds me very much of this Torah, or some of the things in this Torah portion. And so bear with me for a moment as I tell a story, and it will relate here in a moment. But in 2020, my wife and I got pregnant, and it was our first pregnancy. It was quite exciting. We found out on Mother's Day, and I remember calling all of our family members and telling them, "Oh, we're pregnant! It's wonderful!" And they're all so happy for us. Then we go to our home fellowship at Dr. Joe Zollinger's house and tell everyone there, and they're all excited and pray over us, and it's wonderful. We found out probably at about 5 or 6 weeks of pregnancy. We get a midwife and we go through the process. And then things start to get a little complicated after a few weeks, and our midwife kind of tells us, if you experience a miscarriage, there's going to be kind of the signs that lead up to it, and then this is what you'll experience afterwards. And some of those things were kind of happening, and it was concerning. There was this concern welling up inside of me. I believe it was a Tuesday night that I began to think, I was connecting all the dots, and I was like, I think we're going to experience a miscarriage. The very next day, my wife calls me. I'm at work. It was about 3 p.m. She calls me and tells me that we had a miscarriage. And it was devastating. It was a great loss of our first child. And it was, we had to call all our family members, tell them that our child had passed. And we had to go to Dr. Zollinger's that next Shabbat and tell our faith family that we lost a child. And they laid hands on us and prayed, and that was really beautiful. And then Christina's pregnancy symptoms went away, and tried to carry on. We went through this great grieving process. And many weeks would go by. About 9 weeks later, we realized that we were pregnant again. And I'm thinking, I don't know how that happened. And so it's kind of a mystery. And I just couldn't believe what I was suspecting might be true, but I couldn't believe it. Wasn't going to believe that until we got a heart monitor on Christina's belly, and we hear the da-dum, 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 da-dum. And our child was still alive in the womb. And that was when I could accept that my son is alive, beyond what I could possibly understand. So in that moment, I could really relate to this Jacob situation, where he's fully believes he's lost his child, that his child is dead. And he has grieved the loss for 20 years. And he is experiencing that in its fullness. Then his sons come to him and they're like, "Hey, no, Joseph's alive." And I can't believe that. I'm afraid to believe that. Because if I believe it, I'm wrong. I'll have to deal with the grief all over again. But then his sons convince him, and he says, "Enough. Joesph beni chai, my son lives." And it's great joy. And of course, in my own life, I get to share that with all my faith family again, and we all rejoice. And we name him Eliezer, which means my God helps, because God helped him stay alive in the womb. And I was reflecting on the Bible, like what is an example in Scripture of something similar to what I just experienced? And I'm like, Jacob. So I went back and I reread this section at that time, and I was like thinking, what did Jacob say when he realized? Like, what was going through his mind? What did he realize? And he had that denial at first, but then he says, "Enough. Joesph beni chai. Joseph, my son, lives." And so that is why my son has the middle name Chai. It's Eliezer Chai. Eliezer lives. And it is kind of in connection to the story that I felt was so relatable at the time. And then God, in his ultimate wisdom and mercy, brought forth our son about 3.5 weeks early so that he could be born at this very Torah portion. This is a living testimony of the faithfulness of God and his mercy on us. And also in recent past of this week, I had another living Torah moment. Living Torah is when you're reading, you're studying the Torah portion, and you're realizing there's things that are going on in this Torah portion that are affecting my life right now. It's like God put it here just for me, and it probably happens to all of us more than we even realize. I bet it happens to me more than I ever have noticed, but it was quite apparent this week as my father had his 4th stroke. And I had to bear with the question that Joesph poses in 45 verse 3 when he reveals himself to his brothers. He says, "I am Joesph. Is my father still alive?" Is my father still alive? I recognized this week that this is a universal question that, with rare exception, we all face this question with our father and our mother at some point. Is my father still alive? Will he live long enough for me to see him again? Will I see him when he comes back from Canaan? Will he come to me? Will I see him in my own life? Will he see my 3rd son? So as I'm wrestling with this, and I'm thinking with this lens, I'm studying this book, and I see an incredible thing. And there's this message of the gospel just right here in this section that I'd never seen before. But it's a beautiful thing, and I'm going to read some verses here, and I want you to think of the gospel and see if you see what I see. So it's chapter 45, verses 26, 27, and 28. It says, "And they told him, saying, Joesph is still alive. He is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart ceased, for he did not believe. But when they spoke to him all the words which Joesph had spoken to them, and when he saw the wagons which Joesph had sent to transport him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. And Israel said, Enough, my son Joesph is still alive. Let me go and see him before I die." They tell him, and his heart seizes. He doesn't literally die, but in this figurative way, in the way that it's written, his heart is like stopping. It's akin to death. And it's directly associated with he did not believe. In verse 27, they give their testimony. This is what we saw. This is what he said. And after telling their testimony, his spirit is revived. Resurrection. And he obviously believes because he makes a statement of faith. And he says, "Enough, my son is still alive." And then he walks out that faith, confirming that faith by saying, "Let me go and see him. I believe it so much that I'm going to go over there and I'm going to see him. I know he's alive." And that gives me hope. Knowing that everyone, except for the rare exception of the end of the age, everyone dies. But we have hope in our Messiah. That through him, faith in him, and living for him, that we know we will live again. And our loved ones that cling to that faith, they will live again. So blessed be his holy name. Thank you.